At the time of Cold War's release, the Black Ops series was in a bit of an identity crisis, at least when it came to the campaigns. Black Ops 1 is a tightly paced thriller. Meanwhile, Black Ops 2 tells an entirely different sort of story, utilizing branching narratives and spinning a truly dynamic tale. Although the story frameworks are different, the one consistent through line is that they're both well-told stories. Black Ops, up to this point, was known as a series that tells a good story. Then Black Ops 3 arrived. The game delves deeply into the very nature of reality, and it got a bit too lost in the sauce while doing so. Although I think it has a lot of redeemable qualities, it no doubt didn't land with most players. Was it a good story? In some ways maybe, but a well-told story? Certainly not. So what's the through line between these games? The Black Ops series has always experimented with its campaigns, but as a result, there aren't many similarities between them. What makes a Black Ops campaign a Black Ops campaign exactly? This situation got worse with Black Ops 4 because it didn't even have a campaign. The question arose, is a campaign even important to a Black Ops game anymore? When Cold War was initially announced, along with the return of a campaign, I was skeptical. I didn't know where the series was going. When you add in all of the reports of Cold War's harried development, especially in the midst of the pandemic, I was certain that the game would fall flat on its face. But despite my low expectations, when I booted up the campaign, I found an experience worthy of the Black Ops name. It's one of the most pleasant surprises I've had in years. Cold War feels like a greatest hits album of Black Ops. Elements from each game were carefully curated and included here. It works really well, but it's more than just a good time. In light of Black Ops' identity crisis, Cold War arrived at just the right moment. It's a game that unifies its predecessors, and it brings the identity of the series into clearer light. Because Cold War combines elements across the series to form a singular experience, I feel like it's easier to answer the question, what is a Black Ops campaign? Cold War is far from a perfect game, but it arrived at the perfect time. For a series in identity crisis, this was exactly what it needed. So we're going to walk through Cold War's campaign. We're going to look at what Cold War carries through from prior games and see how they work into Cold War's vision. We're also going to look at Cold War's unique contributions, both good and bad. At the end, we'll finally answer the question, what makes a Black Ops campaign a Black Ops campaign? Before I begin, I want to give my usual plug on my science fiction series of the Northfield Saga. This series takes place 10 years after cataclysmic bombs blanketed the world in toxic gas. The survivors are scarred and broken people, and society is a harsh place where assassinations are legal. Mark Northfield feels like a man out of time, a man trying to do the right thing in spite of it all. He's a man bound by his vows to the past. When he's blackmailed into an assassination mission, his very soul is at stake. Unknown to him, his target holds the key to saving the world. The fourth and final book comes out this year, so I'm really making a push to get some reads and reviews on the series to build some momentum. If you want to support me further, it would help in a big way, and I appreciate all of you. There is a link in the video description. Okay, with that said, let's move on to Cold War. Cold War opens with a speech by Ronald Reagan as world events flash across the screen. The space race, the Red Scare, the Iranian hostage crisis. The main purpose of this introduction is to establish the game's time and place, which it does so excellently. We're in the 80s, in the midst of the Cold War. After this intro, the player takes the shoes of Alex Mason, the protagonist of Black Ops 1 and a secondary protagonist in the sequel. Returning players feel right at home. But the man we're with is a new face, Russell Adler. Right away, Cold War is mixing the old with the new. Mason and Adler meet with a contact, and they're cleared to move on to their target, Qasim Asim. He's one of the two terrorists they're after, both of whom are connected to the Iranian hostage crisis. The bar is smoky. It's the 80s, the days of being able to smoke indoors. There's a haze drifting through the place, which the bar's tacky neon lights illuminate. Music blasts from the jukebox, overly loud as it tends to be in bars. Decorations hang over the bar. New Year's 1981. This bar just oozes atmosphere, and you feel a keen sense of place. One of Cold War's best merits is its ability to create atmosphere in its levels, and it has some of the most memorable in the series. This bar is just a taste. Mason and Adler meet with series mainstay and fan favorite Frank Woods. Together they creep through alleyways en route to their target. It's not long before the gunfire starts. It feels like the good old days, playing as Mason with Woods at our side. Eventually we capture our target and Mason interrogates him. Here we're introduced to one of Cold War's new gameplay systems, dialogue choices. It signifies a return to some of the narrative choice that Black Ops 2 did so well. So, what are our options here? Well, you can either throw Seam off the balcony or interrogate him further. If you do the former, you miss out on intel that is crucial to solving one of the side missions. After the interrogation concludes, assuming you didn't throw him off, you can then decide again whether to toss him or alternately capture or release him. None of these choices really have any impact on the narrative. The only choice of any real consequence is the side mission intel. But funnily enough, that still makes this decision one of the more story-impacting ones in the game. But we'll talk more about decisions and consequences later, because I think Black Ops Cold War uses them in an interesting way. One way or another, Asim is taken out of the picture. Mason's team heads after their next target, Arash. They get to a Turkish airfield and identify their suspect. Arash then does something unexpected. Arash decides to kill everyone in the vehicle he just arrived in. It's very strange, but it will make more sense later. Mason then takes a shot at the terrorists, but he botches the shot. What follows is a thrilling chase after Arash's plane in a desperate bid to stop him before he makes off. Although this sequence is exciting to play, it's also very clever. The high intensity orients the player's brain toward action. Aim, shoot, acquire the next target, and continue. The action pulls the player away from thinking about Arash's odd execution. The player isn't really given enough time to process what just happened, and many will just outright forget the Arash execution. I know I did my first playthrough. It's the very same technique that Black Ops 1 uses when Mason is in a rat hole in Vietnam. Swift's suspicion of Mason's sanity could have given away the entire story if the player was given enough time to think about it. But the game abruptly follows this part up with an enemy ambush, so the player isn't able to process it. So just like its predecessors, Cold War is great at planting narrative seeds that either go unnoticed, are misinterpreted, or are otherwise obfuscated and then forgotten. The good guys manage to capture Arash. In his last minutes, he laughs at the Americans, telling them that it was never really about the hostages.
Hostages? It was never about the hostages. His plan is already underway. You won't be able to stop him this time.
Instead, this is all part of a grand plan orchestrated by a man named Perseus. A Russian spy long thought dead, a clear and present danger. Adler kills Arash. He tells Mason to hunt the tarmac for survivors. This is another small narrative seed being planted. Adler and Mason's team debriefs the White House. Here we see another familiar face, James Hudson, Mason and Wood's CIA handler from Black Ops 1 and 2. He explains Perseus's past and how they know of him.
1943. Detailed information from the Manhattan Project was stolen from Los Alamos by the Russian spy known as Perseus. 1968. Vietnam War. Viet Cong soldiers orchestrated by Perseus attempted to steal an American-made nuclear bomb from a U.S. firebase. 5 days ago, while on a mission, we acquired intel that Perseus is in play again and planning an attack on the West.
And well, he's just like the Hudson from before, taciturn and all about the mission. Cold War manages to recapture the essence of the returning characters in this game, which is something I greatly appreciate. It's no small feat, especially given the great span of time since we last saw them in Black Ops 2. Hudson asks for authorization to go after Perseus. Other officials in the room are skeptical of their requests because they're illegal. Here, the story is establishing the CIA's moral ambiguity, a long-running theme for the series. President Reagan isn't too concerned about the details. Perseus is a threat, so he'll give Hudson and Adler whatever they want.
Gentlemen, you've been given an important task, protecting our very way of life from a great evil. There is no higher duty, there is no higher honor. And while few people will know of your struggles, rest assured, the entire free world will benefit. I know you won't fail us.
I highlight this part of Reagan's speech for contrast later. It is a bit eerie to see a real historical figure rendered in such crisp detail. The game's faces, especially in cutscenes, are really impressive, even years later. Say what you will about the importance of graphics in games, but I think they enhance the harsh realism that Black Ops is going for. Hudson speaks with his overseer, Emerson Black, about the team Adler is putting together. They have suspicions about his choices, which honestly feels on brand for the CIA. They have the greatest apprehensions about an agent named Bell.
And the new one.
Bell? Well, don't get me started. That's the one we need to keep our eyes on.
So who is this mysterious Agent Bell? Well, that's you, the player. Cold War brings back character customization from Black Ops 3. It's more limiting appearance-wise, with you only able to change the skin tone of your arms, which makes sense considering the entire campaign takes place in first person. You can give your character a name, but it doesn't really matter because they'll only ever go by Bell anyway. I named my Bell Mark Northfield after the protagonist in my book series, which, yes, is a shameless plug. You can give them a background, which also doesn't have too much of an effect. There are a few small lines of dialogue that can change from what I can tell, but the most interesting feature is the psychological profile. These are essentially perks for your character, and they actually have a pretty big effect. For instance, aggressive behavior increases your reload speed by 50%. Fearless, on the other hand, decreases explosive damage by 50%. Although these perks are mainly just number tweaks to existing stats, they're big enough tweaks to have a noticeable effect on gameplay. So when you change up your perks, subsequent playthroughs can actually feel pretty different. Since Cold War is a game that many players will want to go through twice to experience both of the main endings, this is a welcome addition. It also allows you to express Bell as a character through gameplay. Will Bell be a calm, accurate, nimble shooter? Or instead, someone who hunkers down with a belt full of grenades to lob? While we're on the topic, let's talk about gameplay. How does it differ from its predecessors? Cold War returns to the more grounded gameplay of Black Ops 1 and 2, which makes sense given the setting. There are some niceties brought through from the prior year's game, Modern Warfare. For instance, being able to reload while still aiming down sights. This makes the gameplay feel more fluid than its predecessors. The most flashy new gameplay feature is the ability to use enemies as body shields. You can grab onto enemies and then either shoot at other opponents, kill your hostage, or push them forward with a grenade, turning them into a bona fide explosive. Doing this isn't always the most practical option, especially in hairy gunfights. However, when a plan works out like you expect, and you're gunning down enemies with your hostage, which you turned into a well-timed explosive as a grand end to your antics, you feel like a genuine 80s action hero. The melee animations too are beefed up to give off a cinematic feel. Although the animations can be a bit too long for my tastes and thus feel slightly clunky, I can't deny that they add a layer of spectacle to the experience. So I think gameplay is another great example of how Cold War synthesizes elements from its predecessors. Cold War takes the gameplay customization of Black Ops 3 and it pairs this back to work with a gameplay format more similar to its predecessors, one that also makes sense given the game's time period. In summary, the mechanics are aiming towards giving off the vibes of an 80s action movie, and I think the game really succeeds at it. Okay, that's my take on gameplay. Back to the narrative. When the player takes Bell's shoes, the very first scene opens with an odd yellow filter which quickly disappears. This is something most players won't notice, and I certainly didn't until going over my gameplay footage for this video. But right from the get-go, this is foreshadowing the game's big reveal.
Bell, welcome to West Berlin. We've got a job to do.
Adler will say this phrase often throughout the game. This too is more foreshadowing, but first-time players won't think much of it. Cold War is subtly and consistently laying down the groundwork for its story. It really takes a page out of Black Ops 1's book in this regard. Bell and Adler enter a CIA safehouse, and here they meet the other members of their team, Park, Lazar, and Sims. There isn't much in the way of introducing or building their characters here. They're all about the mission right away. It makes sense given their occupation, but I also think it's a missed opportunity. The game could have cleverly worked in more character building here. With how little we see of these characters throughout the story, the game really needed to use every moment at its disposal to get the most out of its characters. The team has no leads, so they start by looking into the past. They review a past mission in Vietnam, which was a contact point between them and Perseus. The player starts the mission via the evidence board. This is a nice narrative device. The evidence attached to each event feels like a natural way to integrate background story elements that correlate to the mission. Here we learn that Sims served under Adler in Vietnam, and that is where they grew as teammates. When the mission starts, Adler and Sims reviewed the mission. Things went sideways. This detail is good at building narrative anticipation. Now we as the audience want to know how the op went bad. The mission starts, and we board a helicopter with Sims and Adler. They're to recover a classified asset that the Viet Cong are close to capturing. But soon, Adler announces a detour. Our now infamous Russian operator named Perseus has been spotted in the area. A tense fight against the Viet Cong follows. Sims and Belle come across a big red door, which looks out of place in the village. When Belle sees it, there's a flash of yellow, much like Belle's introduction. I didn't even notice these two narrative breadcrumbs until reviewing the footage for this video. It speaks again to just how well Cold War plants these seeds. They seem so obvious now that I've noticed them, but they certainly weren't before. Inside, Sims and Belle come across Soviet soldiers. Their presence here is unexpected, and the intrigue builds. They recover the intel in the safe house. Then, they extract and head to their original target, the classified asset that the Viet Cong are after. They fend off the enemy via helicopter, and then they land at the US base to secure the asset. It turns out that this asset is actually a nuke.
A fucking nuke? Are you fucking kidding me, Adler?
It's a failsafe, that's all you need to know.
We that desperate already?
Not yet.
Nukes is a failsafe. We'll see this tactic used later again in the story. Perseus somehow knew about the nuke. It's established that Perseus is a man with deep connections. Their chopper goes down, which is a little bit of a road bump. Adler and his men fend off attacking Viet Cong, securing the nuke and the intel on Perseus. When the mission, along with the memory, concludes, we hear that phrase from Adler again.
Told you we had a job to do. It ain't done yet, not by a long way.
Afterwards, Hudson discusses their progress with Black.
Yeah.
How did the memory exercise go?
Well, to hear it from Adler, it's working. Bell remembered finding that encrypted intel in Vietnam and is almost finished decoding it.
This conversation is a bit strange when you really contemplate what Hudson is saying. Based on how the mission is set up, the natural assumption is that in current time, Adler's team is still in the safe house, cluttered around the central table or evidence board, and they're talking about their time in Vietnam. The flashback mission is just a gamified version of their conversation, where the player gets to live through what they're talking about firsthand. That's a pretty common storytelling convention for games, and Black Ops capitalizes on that assumption. However, instead of describing Adler's progress as a conversation or recounting, Hudson describes it as a memory exercise. It's odd phrasing, but I suppose you could handwave it. What's especially odd is that he says it's working, and that Bell managed to remember finding the encrypted intel. Why would you need an exercise for this? You would imagine it would be easy to just ask Bell, hey, do you remember nabbing that classified intel in Nam that one time? And you wouldn't need an exercise around it. And you wouldn't describe someone's recollection as working. I won't belabor this. Point being, the way Hudson speaks about Bell has always been a bit odd. But as always, most of these little oddities aren't things you'll pick up on the first go around, or just write them off. Bell decodes this intel, and they finally have some leads to go off of. But there's something else going on.
Does the team know about our mishap in Berlin yet?
No, but if it's connected to one of those names from Bell, they'll find out soon enough.
You won't let that happen, Hudson. Don't say anything more than necessary.
This mishap in Berlin piques the player's interest. Like Black Ops 1, Cold War does a great job of continually setting up new narrative threads that get the player asking questions. Park manages to secure connection to Perseus via a man named Anton Volkov in Berlin. The team is to set out and kill or capture him. Before departing, the player has a chance to wander around the safe house and talk to their allies. This is available before most missions, until the very last ones, and it serves as a way to speak to your teammates in a more relaxed manner. I think this is a great idea because it provides an opportunity to get to know the characters better. The execution, however, is a mixed bag. One thing that these hub missions do is create an air of secrecy. Adler and the others have secret conversations excluding you. Adler will leave to take a phone call from his office, or he'll ask Park to speak in private. Sometimes the reason sounds innocuous enough. For instance, he leaves to speak with Collections one time. But how do we know this is really what his conversation is about? This is the CIA here. That could be a cover for all we know. This secrecy creates the impression that there is a lot more going on than you know, and it also creates a feeling of exclusion. You're not trusted enough to be in these conversations. It's a subtle touch, but the subtlety is what makes it work so well. So I think these hub missions are great for that. Unfortunately though, I don't think they succeed at their primary goal, and that is an opportunity to get to know and bond with your allies. The conversations are just frankly not very engaging. It's stuff like, how do you know Adler? Have you worked with him before? What do you know about Volkov? And the characters don't really do much with these questions. You don't feel like you really know them better or have any connection. You can have a conversation with Sims about requesting increasingly extravagant weapons, but even this conversation lacks a sense of energy or vitality.
Clever. But I wasn't joking earlier.
Look, I get these are hardened covert agents, and secrecy is their whole thing, but you've still got to do a little bit more here with the characters. None of it's bad, but I think it's the game's biggest missed opportunity. Later events in the story would have hit a lot harder if some of the groundwork was laid here. Volkov has a drop with one of his associates, so it's the perfect time for Adler's team to strike. They need to infiltrate from West Berlin to East Berlin, and they do so via sneaking through subway tunnels. The beginning of this level is just great. You and Adler start on this grimy, dingy train, then sneak through graffiti-laden subway tunnels while passing trains rattle the earth. They ascend to the rain-soaked rooftops where the haze of neon lights pierces the darkness. Searchlights and barbed wire abound right next to civilians cowering from the dismal weather. As I talked about with the game's opening scene in the bar, one of Cold War's great strengths is its ability to create a vivid atmosphere for each of its levels, one that draws you into its setting like a moth to the flame. Bell meets with one of their contacts in a bar, and they eavesdrop on a nearby table with Volkov's associates. They learn of an informant that Volkov's men have captured. Your contact Greta asks you to take care of the problem by either saving or silencing the informant. This is an optional mission objective, a returning feature from Black Ops 2. It makes the game world feel a bit more dynamic, like there's more going on than just the mission, you know? So we sneak out. There are a couple new game mechanics introduced here. One is a lockpicking minigame. It's simple, but I appreciate that in a game like this. I didn't buy a lockpicking game after all. And this mechanic is used to great effect in a later mission. The second gameplay mechanic is stealth. Stealth has been in prior games, but it's more fleshed out here. It's a bit more open-ended. Enemies have patrols and detection meters. The mechanic fits this level's setting well. It's also a welcome mechanic because it changes up the pacing, yet it's not overused. The use of stealth in the game feels calculated, not haphazard. If you head after the informant, you'll find him held prisoner by guards. However, if you read the intel on the desk, you'll see that the situation is a bit more hairy than you initially thought. The guards note that the prisoner is actually a double agent for the KGB, but then the informant retracted this confession. Now you have to figure out what to do with this guy, kill or spare him. You can interrogate him further. If you ask him about the intel, he says not to trust the guards. So, the situation remains ambiguous. This is a rat's nest of moral questions. Is he a traitor or not? Even if he is, should you kill him or bring him in instead? Your decision here doesn't really have an impact on the game's story, but it gets your brain primed to think about moral situations and what the right thing to do is. Plus, it helps you define Bell's character. What sort of person is Bell? But I'll get more into the game's choices later. Bell rendezvous with Lazar and Park. They find their Mark Krauss, and Bell sneaks into the apartment. What follows is one of the game's most interesting stealth segments. You're equipped with a tranq gun, and you have to sneak around Krauss's family to find the intel you're looking for. You can put his wife to sleep, but if you do, you have to stage the scene so he doesn't become suspicious. This is a good example of Cold War's willingness to innovate with its missions, and I don't think it gets quite enough credit for it. Bell finds Krause's secret room and plants a tracking beacon. Unfortunately, Krause sneaks in and gets the better of our agent. Bell wakes up, tied to a chair next to Greta. Volkov speaks to us and we're able to respond via dialogue choices. These don't have any effect on the mission either, but they provide a way for the player to express Bell's personality. Is Bell standoffish or professional? You get to decide. Adler and his team arrive in the nick of time, bailing Bell out. After a tense fight in the warehouse, you reach Volkov, and Bell gets to decide whether to kill or capture him. At the risk of repeating myself, this choice also doesn't have much of an impact. It's really about the player defining Bell's moral compass. With the intel they gather from Volkov, they confirm that Percy has managed to smuggle a nuclear device through East Berlin.
We can't be certain of that yet.
He has it. I'm sure of it.
Well, at least Hudson is sure of it. Adler isn't. What makes Hudson so certain? What intel is he working off of? It's another oddity. Further intel leads to the discovery of a secret Soviet base in Ukraine. Adler deploys Bell along with Frank Woods to infiltrate the base and see what's going on there. This is my favorite mission in the game. When Woods and Bell break through the force line, they're greeted by a massive complex. The sheer size of it is a spectacle in of itself, and the way it looms is ominous but also captivating. As I've been talking about, Cold War is fantastic at crafting the settings of each of its levels, and this one gets even more memorable. The mission is enhanced by having Woods at your side. He's just as distinctive of a character as ever, with his biting snark and gruffness. It really highlights the contrast between the new and returning characters. Woods just has the it factor, the pop I guess, that the new crew doesn't. It almost feels like the writers feel more comfortable writing Woods than the others. The notable exception to this criticism is Adler, but I want to wait to talk more about him later. Woods and Bell infiltrate the facility, and they stumble across something entirely unexpected. They find themselves in an arcade of all places. There are even vintage Activision games that you can boot up and play here, adding to the level's character. In fact, it's not just an arcade. This place is a one-to-one replica of a small-town US Main Street, replete with a movie theater, bars, and the other trappings you'd expect. Soviets are running through training exercises here, preparing for the possibility of a war with the US. This is such a fantastic concept for a mission. It's both creative, memorable, and pertinent to the Cold War setting, and it also makes for a great combat arena when things inevitably go south. They reach a computer terminal and discover something called Operation Greenlight. Within the project, they discover something else unexpected, audio from none other than Hudson and Black.
We confirmed it. The nuke smuggled out of Berlin is a Greenlight asset. It's one of ours.
If that gets out,
No one will know, not even Adler's team. The stakes are too high.
high is an understatement. We're talking about an American nuke hidden beneath Berlin.
This brings clarity to a few of the oddities throughout the story. This is the mishap Hudson was speaking about earlier. Similarly, this also explains how Hudson knew for certain that Perseus had a nuke. Well, it's because it was the US's. Woods is characteristically angry about this, but his rage will have to wait. He and Bell have to get out of Dodge. An intense escape follows, but our heroes make it out without too many scratches. Then they finally confront Hudson. Tensions are a bit high, as you can imagine. Even Hudson, who's generally the poster boy of calmness, gets tense.
You might want to rethink that, Woods.
Adler is the only one who remains entirely calm. I think this is a good point of contrast for Adler's character. If he's so calm that he makes even Hudson look emotional, then man, he's one stone-cold killer.
That's what you do best, isn't it, Hudson? Manipulate people. Tell them your own version of the truth.
There is no truth. Only who you choose to believe. Adler knows all about that. Don't you, Russ?
This is another breadcrumb for later. Hudson is calling Adler out for manipulating people and making them believe a version of the truth. One thing I especially appreciate about this confrontation is that it provides additional context for Black Ops 2. Woods has a deep suspicion and animosity towards Hudson throughout the whole game, and it seems to date before Hudson's betrayal at the past plotline's climax. Woods says he should have known about Hudson's treachery. As far as I can recall, Hudson and Woods don't have a ton of interaction that we saw in Black Ops 1 to justify this to the audience. With the events in Cold War, well, it makes total sense. After they finish their insults and accusations, Hudson fills them in on what Operation Greenlight is.
Back in '58, the arms race was in full swing. Eisenhower was convinced if the Reds moved on Europe, we couldn't respond quick enough. So he authorized Operation Greenlight, a top-secret program that placed nuclear bombs in every major European city. The ultimate countermeasure to a Soviet invasion. In '74, the bombs were upgraded to high-yield neutron bombs, capable of terminating personnel without damaging infrastructure.
Thousands dying in a flash. You're talking about fucking infrastructure.
How's that for civilized? We kill the people but preserve the buildings.
We're trying to preserve our way of life.
It's just like Nam, where they also almost lost a nuke. Except, well, this time Perseus actually got a hold of the nuke. Maybe they'll learn their lesson sooner or later, huh? Woods and Mason are disgusted, but Hudson is adamant that this was necessary as a deterrent. The story stakes are clear now. Stop Perseus from detonating the nuke, or the following destruction will be placed on the US's shoulders. Hudson somehow still makes this Adler's fault.
We wouldn't have this problem if you'd done your job. Killed Perseus in Vietnam.
Careful, Hudson. Next time, I might not stop Woods.
Adler remains dead calm, yet he still manages to convey a threat with more weight to it than anything any of the men around him have just said. Again, he's a stone-cold killer on an entirely different level. They move out on a lead to get Perseus. There's an excavation going on in the Ural Mountains. For some reason, Perseus wants to salvage the mainframe. The frosty mountain range of Yamantau is a returning location from Black Ops 1. We also play as Mason here with Woods at our side. So this mission is definitely trying to cash in on nostalgia, but I don't mind. I think Cold War does a pretty good job of including nostalgia and fan service when appropriate, but not overdoing it. Cold War mixes the old with the new, but it doesn't rely on the prior games as a crutch. The two men eventually get separated, and Mason has to creep through the shadows himself. During this, he gets occasional flashes of the numbers broadcast, a remnant from his brainwashing in the first game. Along with increasing the nostalgia factor, I also appreciate this detail because it establishes narrative continuity from Black Ops 1 and 2. In the second game, we saw that Mason still suffered from the broadcast signals, so it's nice to have that narrative thread unbroken here. When they reach the mainframe, their pilot Volkov has concerns about its size.
Is the mainframe big? Because if it's too big, we can't lift off. No! It's regular size!
This part is so in character for Woods. He's never been one for precise technicalities, so of course he'd lie about it to get their pilot's butt down there to pick it up. Woods and Mason hook a winch into the mainframe, and they have to defend it while Soviets attack. The ascent isn't a smooth one, with the mainframe twisting about and ramming into things, making the shooting hectic. It's a very cinematic but also creative set piece. This mission is a good example of Cold War's general approach. It takes the familiar, in this case the Yamantau setting and our characters, and it does something unique with them, like this mainframe ascent. Once the mainframe's out, Hudson and Black scrape it for intel. Unfortunately, Perseus erased the files, leaving them with nothing, so the mission was a failure. There's only one place now to get the intel they need: the Lubyanka building, the KGB headquarters themselves, the very heart of the beast. At the CIA safehouse, Hudson and Adler have another scuffle. Adler's planning on bringing Bell along for the mission, which enrages Hudson.
I don't need Mason or Woods. I need Bell. He's got the skill we need.
Are you enjoying this? You're risking the entire operation unnecessarily.
It's not unnecessary. It's calculated.
In the moment, this seems like something we can just chalk up to Hudson's inherent suspicion and distrust of those around him. It makes sense he'd want his most trusted guys, naturally Woods and Mason, to do this op. However, he's particularly angry about Bell's presence. Given the game's conclusion, well, I'd probably act the exact same way in hindsight. This is another example of how Cold War sets up its plot twist, yet it manages to obfuscate this hint by the nature of Hudson's suspicious personality. Nonetheless, Adler has his way, and the operation commences. The mission starts from Volkov's point of view. He's the trusty pilot from the last mission, and he's also our inside plant. His goal is to secure a bunker key for Adler, so they can access the vault that has the intel they need. But first, Volkov must attend a meeting with top Soviet officials, including the president of the Soviet Union himself, Gorbachev. They discuss the presence of a mole within their ranks. The president has brought aboard Imram Zakhaev to oversee the investigation. He's an interesting inclusion. If you played Modern Warfare, you know he's the primary antagonist. So, Zakhaev's presence here seems to be an attempt to unify the Black Ops timeline with the Modern Warfare series, at least the reboot. However, I didn't pick up on any references in the subsequent games, so it seems like these plans may have been cancelled. Then again, I can't say I was looking all too closely for them, so maybe I missed something. However, it would be a bit odd if true. The latest Modern Warfare takes place in the current day ostensibly, yet Black Ops 2, which takes place in 2025, has technology that we're not even near close to using, like advanced robotics and stealth suits. Maybe it's just an Easter egg and I'm overthinking it. At the end, Gorbachev reiterates that they're trying to protect their way of life.
Comrade Belikov, we are in grave danger from the capitalists. Our collective, our very way of life is at risk.
This mirrors President Reagan's speech at the beginning of the game, and it highlights the similarities between them. The CIA and their associates have committed some very questionable acts throughout the game, like Operation Greenlight, and this reflection here serves as another means to make the player question the morality of the team they're playing for. When the meeting is done, Belikov is off to find his key. This is one of the best gameplay segments of the game, and one of the most creative in the entire series. There are a variety of ways Belikov can get a bunker key. For instance, I infiltrated the server room and I rerouted Belikov's incriminating external communications to another official. I printed this off as evidence and presented it to Kravchenko. In the midst of apprehending the official, I made off with the bunker key. My game actually ended up bugging out, and one of the side mission evidence pieces didn't spawn, so I had to restart the mission. And although I didn't record it, I replayed this mission in an entirely different way. Instead, I broke into the armory and stole a blank keycard. I then reprogrammed the keycard with the necessary permissions. Even within this path, there were permutations. I broke into the armory, but I also could have bribed the guard to let me in. This mission also puts the lockpicking mechanic to great use. Guards are on patrol, so you have to pick locks when they aren't looking, which adds a great deal of tension and makes the minigame more engaging. No matter how you go about it, you'll eventually end up with a keycard and let Adler's team in. Then you take the role of Bell, and you infiltrate the facility under disguise with Adler. In the elevator, we run into Zakhaev. If you answer his question wrong, he'll try to fight you, but we handily knock him out. That's the last we'll see of Zakhaev. Again, his presence here is just a bit odd. The mission heats up, with Bell and Adler going guns blazing to reach the vault. The mission has excellent pacing. The slow-paced start makes the high-intensity action feel like a welcome payoff. There's definitely a claustrophobic feeling to this mission. We're in the heart of the enemy. We couldn't be more outgunned or outnumbered. The level and gameplay design nicely complements this. We fight through cramped interiors leading to the vault, and have to fend off enemies while opening it. You acutely feel the pressure of the situation. On the way out, they unleash toxic gas to aid their escape. The reduced vision caused by the gas mask is another source of this claustrophobia. Every part of this mission is masterfully designed, from the pacing to the level design to the concept. I think it's about as close to perfect as you can get for a COD level. The intel they recovered was a list of sleeper agents, one of which included a nuclear engineering scientist named Theodore Hastings. They track his movement to Cuba, where they discover a hub for Perseus activity. This is likely the location of the stolen Russian nuke. This mission marks the point of no return for the story, and a last call for the side missions. So I'll use this as a segue to talk about Cold War's side missions. These are a returning feature from Black Ops 2, but they're implemented slightly differently. There are two missions, Operation Red Circus and Operation Chaos. They each include a puzzle, which can only be completed by finding 3 sources of intel scattered throughout the levels. The solution is randomized per save file, so you can't simply Google the answer online. The puzzles themselves are pretty good, with you having to compile the information and the clues to uncover double agents and decrypt a floppy disk. Given that we've been consorting an evidence board for the entire game, it feels fitting to manually have to piece together evidence and solve mysteries ourselves. Although the game strongly encourages you to actually solve the puzzles and get the right answers, you don't truly have to. Getting the right solution only changes a few dialogue lines at the end of the game. The missions themselves are pretty standard fare. They're short and don't overstay their welcome. My biggest criticism with them is that they feel like another missed opportunity. In both missions, you play as Alex Mason with Woods at your side. Now don't get me wrong, I love every opportunity to play as the dynamic duo. However, these side missions would have been the perfect opportunity to flesh out the new characters, especially Park and Lazar. We barely get any screen time with them throughout the game, and they feel like distant associates rather than people we care about. This becomes especially relevant in the next main mission. The entire crew heads to Cuba to find Hastings and get the nuke back. However, things take a turn for the worst. Perseus wipes out the scientists, and strangely enough leaves the nukes behind. The reason why is bad. Perseus forced the scientists to reverse engineer the detonation codes. Perseus now has access to all of the nukes that are a part of Operation Greenlight, spread across all Europe. The downward spiral continues. They try to exfil from the roof, but Lazar, Park, and Bell are surrounded by enemies. Their helicopter arrives, but the ground gives way underneath them. Bell can only secure one ally, and you must choose, Park or Lazar. This choice falls a bit flat for me. Park and Lazar have so little screen time, and the game hasn't established them well enough for me to have formed any connection with them. The decision might as well come down to a coin toss for me. It's a shame, because as I pointed out in the video, there were multiple missed opportunities that the game could have used to make this connection stronger, and therefore make this moment land with the emotional punch it was going for. Whether you choose Park or Lazar doesn't really impact the game's story. The survivor will be present in cutscenes for the rest of the game, but there isn't anything more substantial than that. Hudson and Black lament the failure, but there's hope.
Well, that was a goddamn fiasco.
You go in with the intel you have, not the intel you want. We paid the fucking piper down there.
You think this is Bell's fault?
I don't know whose fault it is. I just know that Perseus doesn't have a single fucking nuke. He's got dozens.
Millions of people are gonna die, and the United States will take the blame. You need to find out where he's planning to broadcast the activation signal.
How are we gonna pull that out of our ass?
Bell knows where it is.
Bell? This goddamn science project was a failure!
Don't count Adler out yet. The man has a deep bag of tricks.
Bell? A science project? The game is starting to tip its hand more now. We're nearing the reveal. They return to the CIA safehouse. Adler and his team strap Bell into a gurney and wheel them into an operation room. Adler says Bell is the key to stopping Perseus, and has always been. Regardless of how much you've been picking up on the clues throughout the story, it's obvious that something strange is going on here. Adler orders Sims to prepare the dosages. He injects the serum directly into Bell's brain, despite the risks it presents to Bell's health. Then Adler says the phrase we've heard throughout the story.
We had a job to do.
Adler urges Bell to remember Vietnam. There was a bunker that Bell discovered there, and they need to know what Bell found inside. We then hear Perseus' voice, urging Bell not to trust Adler. He's lying.
Do not trust Adler. Adler is lying to you. Do not trust him. Do not listen to Adler.
Adler urges Bell on, starting with the debrief. Bell woke up in the middle of a firefight. Right away, the game establishes that this is an unreliable story with an unreliable narrator. Adler says Bell picked up an M16, but you can pick up a different weapon and the dialogue changes.
You ran forward and picked up an M16. Or maybe it was another weapon.
Bell fights through Viet Cong and comes across a three-forked path. Adler tells Bell to head towards the waterfall. Bell discovers a cave with Soviets. At the end rests the bunker door. If you remember, this is the same red door from the first Vietnam mission, and there's the same yellow flash when Bell opens it. It indicates that during that mission, the memory exercise was the same serum-injecting brainwashing exercise that Bell is currently enduring. As I've been pointing out, the game sets this stuff up really well. When Bell reaches Perseus behind the bunker doors, the flashback abruptly stops. Adler kicks off another attempt. Bell once again finds themselves in the same helicopter. The level is the same one as before, but it's altered slightly. It takes place at night and allows the player to take a stealth approach. After fighting through the rice fields, Bell finds themselves at the three-forked path once more. Adler tells Bell to go in a different direction this time. However, you can refuse. I went down to the waterfall again. If you do so, Adler questions what's going on. Regardless, Bell eventually reaches another bunker door, where there's a neat puzzle. You use projectors to create a door that then materializes. Once we reach Perseus, the memory flickers out. Adler grows agitated and kicks off another attempt. Bell finds themselves in the helicopter again, and must fight through the same rice fields again. This is a cool story beat overall, but I will say it gets pretty old and annoying having to fight through the same level 3 times. I wish they would have done it slightly differently. Eventually, Bell finds themselves in a pretty trippy corridor, and Bell has trouble finding the red door. Adler hits Bell with another injection which could be lethal, but he doesn't care.
Park, give Bell another injection.
That could
do it, now!
Bell's heart rate is spiking. I'm not sure how much longer Bell can last.
After the injection, Bell finds the door. They access a terminal, and memories start to flash back to Bell.
We've known each other for years.
It appears the subject's programming is beginning to take hold.
Been through the hell of Vietnam together.
The game is tipping its hand even further. The player understands what's happening. Bell has been programmed by Adler. The flashback ends before Adler gets what he wants. The memory exercise begins yet again. Blissfully, the game skips ahead and doesn't make us fight through the same level again. Adler orders Bell into the ruins. If you disobey, he gets much more aggressive than before, and doors literally slam onto the ground around you. Eventually, you're forced into the room with only the red door. Bell goes inside one last time. Within, we see one of Bell's memories of sitting at a war room table with Perseus. He told Bell where they're headed after getting the Greenlight arsenal. Things are becoming clearer. When Bell wakes up, the past is revealed in full clarity.
Bell, you were one of Perseus's agents. His associate, Arash turned on you at the airstrip in Turkey. Left you for dead.
From there, we fly to Solovetsky.
But I have other plans for you. Perseus thinks too highly of you.
I don't want the competition.
We were there. We found you after everything went down.
From there, Adler's team recovered Bell from the airstrip. You were the person that Arash tried to execute in the airfield. Adler and Park then brainwashed Bell into thinking they were a CIA agent, and even implanted memories of serving with Adler in Vietnam into their head. Why go through all this trouble though? Adler explains.
Interrogation didn't work with you, but thanks to MK Ultra's research, we had a backup plan. If you believed you were someone else, we could lead you to a place where you'd give everything up.
Hudson's words earlier were accurate. You really were Adler's little science project. This also explains why Adler took Bell onto dangerous missions. He wanted Bell to feel like they were trusted, because the more Bell believed their identity, well, the easier it would be to extract information. Bell's innermost secrets had been hidden behind this metaphorical bunker door until now. I think this twist is executed really well. The breadcrumbs were placed excellently throughout the story, as I've hopefully pointed out. From Adler always using the trigger phrase "we have a job to do" to Hudson's suspicion, to the red doors and to everything in between. The hallmark of a good twist is one that you don't see coming, but when it happens, all of the oddities or circumstantial occurrences from the past come into an orderly clarity. And I think this is what Cold War achieves. I've been waiting until now to talk more about Adler's character. I think he's one of the most compelling characters in the entire series. Adler's been pretending to be war buddies with you this whole time. He's been pretending to trust you out of your shared time together. He's seemed to believe in your potential, defending you against the skeptics like Hudson.
I know you can do this. Hudson doesn't trust anyone he can't control.
This revelation, however, puts all of his prior actions into a different light. The kindness he's displayed towards you throughout the game has been fake. He doesn't care about Bell at all, and this is evidenced by how quickly he'll inject Bell with potentially lethal doses to get what he wants. We've seen glimpses of his ruthlessness throughout the story, But this brings his coldness to an entirely different level. Even here, in this revelation, he oscillates between kind and harsh. One moment he's grabbing Bel's throat, the next he's sympathizing, understanding that Bel must hate them.
I realize you probably hate us right now, what we've done to you.
He's an absolute snake, and that's what makes Adler so interesting. He can be a very charming, personable guy. Sometimes it even seems genuine, but there's a ruthlessness to him that goes unmatched. Even Hudson, who's known for being cold, doesn't hold a candle to him. He's a complex man, whose true motives and feelings at any one point are difficult to nail down. As I said, I truly believe he's one of the best written characters in the series, and the best new character in the series in years. Adler asks Bel one last question: where is Perseus? From the flashback, Bel knows Perseus is in Slavetsky. Here is the game's final choice, and it actually does affect the game in a truly substantial way. Bel can either tell the truth about Perseus' location, or Bel can lie. This will dictate the final mission we play and the final outcome of the story. With this in mind, I want to reflect upon the game's story choices in general. It's true that almost none of them have a large impact on the story's outcome. However, they're not useless. They still serve two storytelling purposes. The first is that they condition the player to think morally about the story and its events. You're making decisions on how to deal with potential double agents, whether to kill or spare suspects, which friends to save or sacrifice. Because you're often forced to contend with morals, it puts an even bigger spotlight on the moral ambiguity of the CIA and their opponents. After all, isn't Operation Greenlight at least partially their fault? And especially on the heels of this latest revelation, where your supposed friends have been manipulating you and injecting you with Lord knows what, you're left asking, are these really the good guys? Are these people worth fighting for? These decisions throughout the game prime the player to think about the entire conflict morally. Second, these decisions throughout the game help the player think about and establish Bel as a character. Firstly on moral terms as I've described, but also in terms of personality. Is Bel standoffish or entirely focused on the mission? Depending on how you've defined your Bel, well, you may be more inclined to help or betray Adler here. Both of these purposes, Bel's personality and the moral framing, are both priming the player for this moment, to prepare them to make this decision of weight. Adler himself even points out this is Bel's chance to define who they really are.
This is your chance to define who you really are, Bel.
While the story isn't as dynamic as Black Ops 2 in its network of choices and consequences, I nonetheless still appreciate their inclusion in Cold War. I think it would have been a tough ask to have such a network of outcomes in a game that takes place between game entries. Cold War is more beholden to set continuity, although as we'll see, it isn't afraid of breaking it. So there are two divergent paths from here. Let's go into each of them. I'll start with the good ending, where you tell Adler the truth. Adler affirms Bel's choice, and subsequently affirms that Bel's one of them.
You made the right choice, Bel. Come on. You're still one of us.
His voice is warm, but even this is another lie to manipulate Bel. He doesn't think Bel is one of them. It's another example of how many layers of deception he's willing to hide behind. The entire squad deploys in a very hoorah cutscene. They're going to finally catch Perseus and stop him from destroying the free world. As for the mission itself, well, it's actually a bit anticlimactic. It only lasts around 8 to 10 minutes. They infiltrate Perseus' facility and take out AA guns, which allows air support to raise the place and stop Perseus from being able to detonate the nukes. And well, that's it. Perseus himself gets away. Adler resolves that this is a message to Perseus. The immediate threat is stopped, but it doesn't feel like the main conflict is all that resolved. I wanted to do more than just send Perseus a message here. Maybe that's where Black Ops 6 will come in, I guess. I'd have a bigger issue with this ending if Cold War didn't have multiple of them. Hudson and Black speak afterwards, and the game accounts for the smaller narrative actions throughout the game. Whether you killed or spared targets, whether you fully solved the side quests, that sort of thing. So I suppose you could say that these decisions had some impact on the story, but I don't consider this sort of end summary as all that substantial. The final cutscene is Adler and Bel traveling together. Adler has one last loose end to tie up. He turns the gun on Bel, just as Bel raises their own weapon. There's a flash, and it's ambiguous who lives or dies. This is why I said that Adler never saw Bel as one of his team. Bel is just another part of the mission that must be eliminated. So that's how the good ending goes. Now let's see about the bad ending. Bell lies to Adler and tells him that Perseus is in Duga. Adler once again affirms Bell. I think it's funny how confident he is in Bell's brainwashing, that he doesn't even see the possibility of betrayal. One detail I like is that your former allies' nameplates turn red, indicating that they are now your enemy. Bell secretly radios to Perseus and sets up an ambush in Duga. There is a mission debrief cutscene where Adler and his allies set up the operation. This entire cutscene is laden with irony, because we know that they're working off of bad intel. When they arrive, Adler figures out pretty quickly that this is all a setup, but by that point it's too late. Bell and their Russian allies open fire. The game is over. Now it's just cleaning up the mess. Bell kills their former allies one by one, leaving only Adler left. In typical Adler fashion, he tries one last deception, but he dies by the sword as well. Perseus himself then emerges. He wanted to be here for this moment too. Together, he and Bell detonate the nukes. The fallout is as catastrophic as expected. Europe is in smoke, and the US is blamed for all the damages. Perseus awaits the downfall of the US. A final summary of the player's choices follows, much like the good ending, except it's narrated by Perseus. And that's the bad ending. I usually don't like the bad endings in video games, but in Cold War's case, I actually find it a bit more satisfying than the good ending. I think it's because it feels like the bad ending actually brings the story to a close, while the good ending doesn't resolve much. Of course, this bad ending isn't canon, otherwise none of the events in Black Ops 2 could have happened. The good ending is canonical. Still, given Bell's dual alliances, I appreciate the ability for the player to choose. Let's take a step back and look at the game as a whole. As I mentioned at the beginning of the analysis, Cold War is like the greatest hits album of Black Ops games. It takes the characters, the tight pacing, and the plot inversion of Black Ops 1, and it mixes these elements with the story choices, side missions, and focus on moral ambiguity that Black Ops 2 excels at. Then, Cold War also takes some inspiration from Black Ops 3's stellar character customization, pairing it back to something that fits the time era and gameplay structure. On top of its inspiration, Cold War has its own defining elements. The two biggest highlights for me are the introduction of Russell Adler, as well as the stellar level design, both in terms of set pieces and the atmosphere they create. Cold War has its own set of problems. The new characters aside from Adler are a miss. There were just too many missed opportunities to make them connect. And of the elements Cold War takes from its predecessors, I don't think the game surpasses them. I think Black Ops 1's story is more tightly crafted, the choices in Black Ops 2 are better, and so on. But despite its problems, Cold War doesn't feel like an aimless mismatch of its predecessor's successes. Instead, Cold War's design is finely calibrated, resulting in a campaign that feels like a unified experience despite these disparate elements. Along with being a cohesive game, perhaps Cold War's greatest contribution to the series is how it acts like a unifier between the games. This game, with how it picks and chooses elements from its predecessors, feels like a distillation of what the Black Ops series is all about. So let's finally answer the question, what makes a Black Ops campaign a Black Ops campaign? To me, the identity of a Black Ops campaign can be described like this. A Black Ops campaign is set in a world of moral grayness, where the good guys fight dirty and the bad guys themselves sometimes have a point. It's a world where things aren't quite as they seem, and there is a reality that the hero isn't able to recognize at the start of the story. There is a false reality, you could say, that blinds or makes the hero ignorant. Only by diving deep into discomfort, be it by exploring a painful past, or by moving past layers of lies and deception and simulation, oftentimes discovering uncomfortable truths along the way, can the hero remove this false sense of reality and discover the true state of the world. And only by doing this, by ascertaining the true state of the world, can the hero overcome the antagonist. All of the Black Ops games have these elements, and I think Cold War is what really helps solidify this identity in my eyes. I'll be curious to see what Black Ops 6 holds and if it follows this pattern, or if it continues this series' experimentation and goes off in an entirely different direction. Either way, I think the legacy of Cold War is its refinement of the series. It wasn't a perfect game, but given the series' drifting sense of identity when Cold War came out, I think it was the perfect game that arrived at the perfect time. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please consider liking and subscribing. If you want to support me further, please consider checking out the Northfield series. Links are in the description. Thanks for the support as always. Until next time.